All right, so greetings everyone. So thank you for joining the conference today. I think this presentation will go nicely after Lynette's and Zachary's presentation. So my name is Josiane Van Dorpe. I'm a master's student in linguistics at the University of Quebec in Montreal and an intern at Ubisoft La Forge as well. I will be presenting my colleagues and I research on a new methodology to reveal identity biases in toxicity detection systems for video games. So as this is an industry use case, let me give you a little bit more context here in this background section. So you're probably familiar with this, but players in a multiplayer online competitive video game can play either in a team of 4 or 5 players against another team or 1 versus 1. For player interaction, certain games facilitate communication either through verbal means using a microphone or through written messages, and players can communicate between their own teammates or with the other teams. Toxic speech is found written in-game chat and is on the rise at the moment and has been for 4 years in a row, according to a survey by the Anti-Defamation League in 2022. My colleague Zachary Yang presented earlier today a great analysis of toxicity trends in these types of environments. Video game companies want to tackle this issue, of course, as it is largely affecting their players. And as a first step, several companies started exploring the different ways to detect toxic behaviors and toxic chats. A method that is gaining traction not only in the industry and academy, but also in general in the online sphere is automatic toxicity detection using natural language processing, or NLP. I believe that it was talked about a bit, but I'm still going to go over what is a large language models just very quickly. So to use NLP, we need large language models. You can find large language models a bit everywhere nowadays with, for instance, when you use ChatGPT or Google Translation, or when you type something in the Google search bar and you see recommendations of text to complete your search. To accomplish this, language models are first trained to learn a representation of language from unlabeled data. So they need an enormous amount of data to do so, like books, Wikipedia articles, news articles, forum posts. So the goal is for the model to make text or sentence predictions based on a prompt after that. Once the training is done, language models can also be fine-tuned for a specific task, which means that you can give them labeled data for it to learn how to translate text or how to categorize text, for instance. So toxicity detection is a case of text classification, as you train a model to learn if a text is toxic or not, according to the labeled data. The model can give a binary result, such as toxic or not toxic, or a categorical prediction if you want to label specific types of toxicity, for example. So large language models are often used for toxicity detection, as it takes the context around the possibly toxic text into account. An alternative method for toxicity detection is using a list of keywords to identify toxic terms. Sorry, excuse me. This means that spelling mistakes or leet speak, which is replacing letters in a word by numbers or symbols, are not detected. With language models, there is a lower impact on toxicity detection as the context is also considered. Even though NLP models demonstrate impressive performance at their tasks, they are trained in a way that they are capturing many relationships between words and sentences. A recognized concern stemming from this lies in the potential for these models to perpetuate and even amplify social biases that are inherent in the training dataset and that we humans have. A good example is in toxicity detection. How convenient. So for this research, we focus on cases where the model overestimates or underestimates the toxicity of terms associated with concepts pertaining to an individual's identity. For instance, in this image right here, a player says, "I am a Black gay woman." The model might identify this sentence as toxic since it is used to seeing these 3 terms in hate speech. In contrast, a player saying, "I am a white straight man," will not be flagged as toxic. More specifically, we look in the system's prediction for overestimation or underestimation of toxicity on terms in categories such as skin color, gender, and sexual orientation, and many more. In toxicity detection, these types of bias can render players invisible as they prevent them from talking about themselves or their community. Even before we decide what will be the ultimate use of the toxicity detection model within the game, it is best to identify where the model is too or not enough reactive to prevent the issues that could arise from these kinds of biases. To do this, we present a prototype of an identity bias benchmark dataset for toxicity detection models, as well as a novel method that combines a reactivity analysis and model performance metrics to identify sensitive terms possibly conveying biases. To apply it specifically to the video game industry, we will evaluate Toxbuster. So Toxbuster is a BERT-based toxicity detection model that is developed right now by Ubisoft and by Zachary. It is trained to classify chat lines from Ubisoft games like Rainbow Six Siege and For Honor into several different categories such as insults, sexual harassment, and more. So the prototype involves 3 main steps. First, we create an annotated dataset that we'll give to Toxbuster to obtain its toxicity predictions. From there, we will apply the reactivity analysis. We will quantify how much Toxbuster reacts or not to the presence of a possibly biased term in a chat line. We will also see how well Toxbuster performs on each term. And the third step is to create a watch list of terms that are commonly used to express biases in Toxbuster's prediction according to our results. So to create a dataset, we were strongly inspired from a previous research by Kirichenko and Mohammad. They evaluated biases in the outputs of a model by feeding it some fabricated sentences with only 1 or 2 words replacing some tags in the sentences to test the sensitivity of the model. They tested binary biases, so gender and racial biases, to observe in which direction the model was skewed towards. The sentences were not reflecting the reality of in-game chats, which is why we adapted this method to resemble chat lines. So capitalized first words are not capitalized in a sentence and there's no punctuation. And we also added more terms and categories, and we did not limit ourselves to only 2 terms per category. So the dataset is created from a list of 22 sentence templates and 46 terms. In this table, you can see some sentence templates with the tags to replace. There are either groups or attribute tags. Groups tags will be replaced by terms that reference a group of people, and attributes are mostly adjectives. A group tag can be replaced by the combination of an attribute and a group. In this table, you can see examples of terms, their category, and the tags they can replace. As you can see, some terms can be placed both as groups or attributes. We have a total of 13 categories, but they're not really relevant for the final analysis. By iterating through the templates and the terms, we created a total of 16,008 synthetic chat lines. You can see some examples of sentences that are in the dataset. As you can see here with the underlined terms white and gay, some can be used both as attributes and as groups, depending on their function in a sentence. So the sentence templates were inspired by real game chat data, namely from Rainbow Six Siege and For Honor. To create a complete and representative data set as much as we could, we had the help of members of the Ubisoft's employee resource groups. You can see their logos to the right. These groups are formed by employees of Ubisoft that share a common demographic, characteristics, stage of life, or lived experience. As employees coming from different backgrounds and communities, they were able to provide feedback on the chosen terms, sentences, and bias dimensions, and they were also able to propose adding new ones. There is, of course, an ethical consideration I really want to mention here, but that could be on every slide of the presentation. As many papers point out, and of course, we all know this, but even choosing terms or bias categories is in itself biased, as it depends on so many contextual and sociological factors. As of right now, we are aware that we are mostly looking at biases in the point of view of English-speaking North Americans, and even that is not exactly is still pretty large. This is something we have to keep in mind for the whole project. So to create the prototype, we had to get annotations. So Ubisoft employees volunteered to help with the task of annotating a small part of the dataset, and we used these manual annotations to infer labels on the full dataset. So these labels serve as a ground truth, a way to evaluate if Toxbuster performs well on the dataset, and also a way to compare how reactive the model is compared to humans. In the end, the dataset resembles the table below. There are several chat lines with terms we want to evaluate with the label for the ground truth and Toxbuster's binary prediction. 0 means the sentence is not toxic, and a 1 means the sentence is toxic. As you can see, Toxbuster's prediction is not always the same as the ground truth, which is what is interesting here. So with the ground truth and the prediction, we then proceeded to the reactivity analysis. First, we calculated the average predictive difference in probability of toxicity, which is actually an average on how likely the sentence will be toxic if a term is in a sentence versus if the term is not in the sentence. So here, to understand it a bit better, we can see an example for the term black, for instance. So the numbers you see here are fictional. They only serve as an example. So the difference in probability of toxicity is calculated in the sentence with and without the terms. And this is repeated for all sentences. So I love people and I love black people. We look at the predictive difference, which is 0.3. And then we do this for our sentences and an average is made at the end. So the average here would be 0.3 as well. And from this, this gives us our reactivity score. So a reactivity score, if the score is of 0, it indicates that a term has no impact on the toxicity of a sentence. If a term has a positive value, it means it is more likely that the whole sentence will be toxic if the term is in the sentence versus if it's absent. And negative values indicate the sentence is more likely to be non-toxic if the term is present. So in this example, this means that if black is in the sentence, it is on average about 30% more likely that the sentence will be tagged as toxic. So here we see the reactivity scores for the ground truth, which related to how reactive humans will be to the terms. So the right of the graphs are positive values, which means a sentence with the term is more likely to be toxic. And annotators were more reactive to the terms, sorry for the terms I'm saying, but homo, boy, yellow, gay, trans, and black. And you can see the graph is cut in the middle. This is because terms in this area all have a reactivity score of 0. At the bottom of the graph, we observe that the terms weapon, gun, and house have a negative score of high value, which makes sense considering the fact that they are relevant to the games which have weapons in them. So to create a watch list of terms that may convey biases in the model, we will ultimately want to find terms with two main traits. One, they have a high or low reactivity score relatively to the ground truth, and two, the model performs poorly on them. So this graph allows us to see the plot of the results for Toxbuster. So we see here the 15 terms with the highest reactivity scores, as well as the 15 terms with the lowest reactivity scores, according to their F1 scores. So for those who are not familiar with F1 scores, it is basically a metric to verify if the model performs well and if it gives correct predictions on chat lines. An F1 score of 100 is preferable. So in this graph, it means that the higher the score is, the term is, the better the model performs on it. So first, we can see here that the terms with the worst performance are weapon, gun, and house, which are also terms with negative reactivity scores. Our hypothesis for the poor performance of the model on these terms is that the context around these terms impacts toxicity more than the term itself. For example, in the dataset, the term weapon is often accompanied by a term that would trigger the model, even if weapon by itself strongly indicates non-toxicity. The same terms also have a negative score in the ground truth, so they are not concerning for us. Let's now take a look at that cluster right here, which contains terms with a higher reactivity score. So this is a close-up from the cluster from the previous graph. They are quite interesting as they have the highest reactivity scores for Toxbuster, but the model performance on them is not particularly high. So the next step with this is to compare it to the ground truth. So this comparison allows us to create a watch list of terms that may convey biases. As a quick reminder. So the watchlist contains terms that have a much higher or lower reactivity score compared to the ground truth and on which the model performs rather poorly. So for the watchlist, here is the terms with a high reactivity score. So in purple, we go with the terms Asian, lesbian, trans, Mexican, gay, and black. Some of these also appear in the ground truth's high scores, but there is still a relatively high difference. And as you might notice, the term yellow is also on the watch list for false negatives. This is because it has a negative score, a negative reactivity score for Toxbuster, which means the model is more likely to tag a sentence as not toxic if yellow is in the sentence. However, it is in the top 3 highest positive score in the ground truth, which means the model should be more reactive to it than it is right now. So already for the conclusion, so from this research, we learned a few things and we can propose next steps for the industry. First, automatic toxicity detection is an interesting and important first step to tackle the amount of toxicity speech found in chat. However, an important consideration is that fine-tuning large language models to reach that goal must be done with diversity and inclusivity in mind. The research provides a flexible and industry-relevant way to identify biases in a toxicity detection model. To keep it up to date and inclusive, the dataset must be adjusted according to each studio's and even each game's localization and target public by adding more terms and sentence templates. Finally, considering biases allows to create a fair and enjoyable gaming experience for players from diverse backgrounds. Using the watch list, bias mitigation methods should be explored and tested to attenuate the reactivity of models. And thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and I'll take any questions right now.
Thank you so much, Josiane. Let's see, there's a question in the Q&A. I don't think that was addressed to you, given the time that I can see here. Is there a question for Josiane? Same thing, the panelists, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Any questions? I'm just going to give it like 10 more seconds because if people are asking questions in the Q&A. Oh, Thorsten. Oh, Selena, can
Me
you
again, just so somebody asks a question. So congratulations. I'm just like with the presentations before, I'm incredibly impressed by all the hard work you're doing. I'm wondering, just as a point of interest, are these conversations usually ones that you have internally within your sort of local network of researchers and the specific company partners? Or are there conversations going on also that go sort of a little bit broader and wider? I mean, this venue obviously is one where you have these kinds of conversations, right? But like in Montreal, you can imagine many different kind of events where you can have these conversations and exchange best practices and so on and so forth. And I'd like to just know a little bit more about where that happens and to what extent. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So for this research particularly, it was done within Ubisoft, but it's also a MyTax internship. So that means we combine industry and academia. So the results will be available. Also, we try to go to several conferences to to spread this research as well and talk about this. Within the industry, I would say that there's this conversation happening. As you might know, the Ubisoft and Riot have a partnership to share some data for toxicity, for the research on toxicity. So this is always part of the conversations. And that's the main places I can think about for now.
Thank you so much, Josiane. I think we're gonna end here since we only have 1 minute left. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.